it can sometimes be a situation where the autoimmunity is hidden by the fact that they're having cycles and the estrogen is nice and strong. And that's why actually you get quite a few women in midlife having issues with suddenly finding out, oh my gosh, I've got Hashimoto's.
Hello and welcome to the Biohack Her podcast. I'm Azra Alagic, your host and founder of Biohack Her. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach specializing in longevity for women, a health and wellness journalist, writer, corporate consultant, and a biohacking advocate. Biohack Her is a space where we can explore ways to optimize our health to live well longer. Whether it's through improving our nutrition, exercising, cryotherapy, supplementation, technology, and more, I'll be bringing you information and interviews with the best longevity experts to help you understand what you can do to optimize your health, prevent disease, and slow down or even reverse the symptoms of aging by taking control of your unique bio-individuality. Want to know more? Let's dive in. Jo, welcome to the pod. Let's start right at the beginning. You specialize in autoimmune issues, but what is an autoimmune condition and what causes them?
Okay. So autoimmunity is when the body's own immune system starts attacking a body part. And there's actually sort of four key areas that need to be addressed when it comes to autoimmunity. Now, there's a couple that you can't really do anything about. Well, one, definitely your genetics. There is a chance that genetically you might be predisposed. Now, I like to turn a lid on that and say, okay, it might not be just the genetics, because we have something called epigenetics where we can actually express whether those genes switch on or off or not. But that's one of the key sort of factors. So if, say, your mother or your grandparent has had an autoimmune diagnosis, then there's a higher chance that you might get that too. Now, another area which tends to be something that we can control is an imbalanced immune function. Now, this could be the result of some sort of toxin, some sort of virus, some sort of bacterial overgrowth that you might have been affected by, and that can then lead to an imbalanced immune function. But this is all reliant on the two key other areas, which are leakiness in the gut, which I think you know all about, and experienced extensively, and also an environmental trigger. So it could be that toxin, that viral overgrowth. It could be having a gastro bug. It could be chronic stress. It could be some form of allergy that you develop due to the leaky gut, which continues to basically trigger that autoimmunity. So it's one of these things where when it comes to an autoimmune diagnosis, working on understanding all the different areas that might have caused that immune imbalance, that's going to be the thing that's going to help you to understand it better.
Yeah, and you mentioned leaky gut, and that's something I'm certainly personally experienced, and I think it really was the start of, well, it felt like it was the start of my own health issues, which has brought me here today. How common do you see that as one of the symptoms of autoimmune, or the beginning symptoms of autoimmune?
Oh, I think every single person with autoimmunity will have some level of leaky gut. Now, well, it's actually the posh name for it is enhanced intestinal permeability. And that means, because our gut is meant to be permeable, semi-permeable, to allow food, nutrition, all the good stuff into our systemic body. But what happens is with the leaky gut is that it opens up more than it should do, and it's allowing toxins and larger food particles into the systemic body, into that bloodstream. So I would say 99.9% of people with any form of autoimmune diagnosis will have a leaky gut. And it's just understanding what is the reason for the leaky gut, because there are so many things in our world nowadays that cause leaky gut. So it could be anything from taking some antibiotics when you're sick with an infection. But it could be things like the food you're eating, the pesticides that are sprayed on your foods. It could be the chemicals that are in the processed foods you're eating. It could be the the birth control pill has actually been found to exacerbate leakiness in the gut. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, that's the ibuprofen that somebody will take maybe for their period pain on a monthly basis. That's causing inflammation in the gut lining. But we've got everything also from chronic stress. Now, stress actually is the biggest one for me, because I think that's the one that a lot of people really can't control, but we can control. But people sort of live in that ongoing stress response, and that can make it really challenging to try and heal.
Yeah. I think what I find is that sometimes people don't realize that they're living with stress, that they're not sort of aware of it. And because it's become so normal, it becomes their new normal. Are you finding that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I think 90, around 90% of the women I work with aren't emotionally chronically stressed, but are physiologically chronically stressed. So the difference is the physiology in the body is causing a nervous system activation, and that's a stress response. But they don't consciously think. And actually, I get some clients who literally live on the sort of the stress. They live on adrenaline and stress,
Yeah.
and it's something that needs to, until they get sort of persuaded into trying out a few little nervous system calming strategies, do they actually realize, oh, maybe I was a bit stressed over that period.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. How common is it for an autoimmune condition to be misdiagnosed?
Oh, well, I think it's very hard to actually get a diagnosis for numerous reasons. I think a key thing is a lot of women, and in fact, autoimmunity is in mainly women. Actually, I think that a lot of them is like 80% are geared towards women having autoimmunity versus men. I think we live in a world where feeling not great is the norm to a certain degree. But also getting that diagnosis is, somewhere if you lived, say, in the UK where you've got the NHS to do blood tests, they're not going to run a full panel on, what your blood autoimmune antibodies are. So that you're not going to find out that way. And the only way you would actually really get to that level would be when you really complain about strong, heavy feelings. Now, my diagnosis for Hashimoto's was basically through a standard blood test, because I live in Singapore where all the tests are widely available. And I had a great doctor who was recognizing that my immune system kept on, failing. And, I was getting sick all the time. And so that came to a diagnosis. But normally it's very hard to get diagnosed. And actually, some people with autoimmunity never get sick because their immune system is so on the ball that it's just constantly in wide awake. So I think that's the difference. Is you could have the symptom of, say, getting sick all the time, or it could be aching joints. But most of that sort of put down to just everyday lifestyle type things.
Yeah, and that was certainly my experience because for many years I was not getting sick at all. And then all of a sudden I did start getting sick quite regularly. And I remember thinking, why am I starting to get sick all the time all of a sudden? It was just before COVID as well. And I started to experience the aching joints. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm getting old. Am I getting arthritis? But I realized it was that
Oh, I've
inflammation
worked
in the body. Yeah.
hard,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 It's that, yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. With your Hashimoto's, how difficult was it to get that diagnosed? You mentioned that you had a really good doctor, but what were the first signs that you sort of started to suspect that something was wrong?
Well, interestingly, actually, I'm not sure whether you know this, but when I was born, I was diagnosed celiac a year into my life. Now, this is 55 years ago. My granny, she's a doctor, and this is a long time ago, so people didn't, get diagnosed, and I was just basically having failure to thrive. Now, through my first 8 years of life, I was taken off gluten because celiac is an autoimmune disease that attacks the gut lining. And so no gluten to age 8. And then Great Ormond Street, which is the top children's hospital in London, said, she's fine. I did endoscopies each year, and they were like, she's fine. She's no longer celiac. So that was a bit weird. So I then introduced gluten again, and then got psoriasis, which is the sort of skin form of celiac, really. It's where you get rashes, and that's the autoimmunity attacking the skin. And then it sort of went in my sort of teens, and then nothing really happened for about 30 years. And then I was literally having lightheadedness when I was standing up, and my energy started to drain, and I just couldn't do what I used to do. Now, I would look back now, and I was probably overdoing exercise, under eating, doing all the things that,
Yeah.
we as women are told in order to have a slim body, you need to work out harder and eat less. Now, that crashed my adrenals and my thyroid. Now, adrenals and thyroid are very much support each other. And so that low energy led me to go, okay, maybe we do a standard blood panel. That blood panel said my TSH, which is for the thyroid, it's basically the marker that tells your brain or tells your thyroid to make more hormone from the brain. And when it goes to, I think it was like 6 or 7, the standard reference range is sort of 0.5 through till 4.5. And mine had gone over the reference range. And so at that point, my doctor said, okay, let's look into your autoimmune antibodies. And that's when I got the diagnosis. Because thyroid disease does tend to be about 80% of any low thyroid function is caused by autoimmunity. The other 20% could be inflammation, poor liver health, nutrient deficiencies like, zinc, selenium, iron. But yeah, so it was one of those things that I think my body really did send me the message that I was crashing to a certain degree.
Yeah. Do you think that autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's are becoming more common in women than what they used to? I mean, you were diagnosed with an autoimmune condition quite young and probably in an era where it's unusual for that to have been picked up. So you were fortunate for it to
Yeah,
get picked up.
totally. And I think it was because my grandparent, I was literally projectile vomiting everything I ate when I was a baby. So I got so sick that it was really emergency work. It's for women. I think they say it's about 80% of women have Hashimoto's versus 20% men. So it just shows how it's leaning towards that way. Commonly for picking up, I think the world is becoming a more leaky gut place, if you know what I mean. There are a lot more things that cause leakiness in the gut. And so that's why there are a lot more autoimmune diseases appearing, being diagnosed.
Yeah, completely agree. So when somebody comes to you with an autoimmune issue or a suspected autoimmune issue, what are the first 3 root causes or systems that you would investigate?
Yeah. So what I tend to do is I get them to fill in a health history and symptom questionnaire, and that gives me some really great puzzle piecing clues. I also then look into, blood work to understand, nutritional deficiencies, thyroid health, liver health, all those sort of areas, B12, folate, homocysteine, all these, areas that will give me clues to inflammation, because inflammation basically is the downstream result of that leakiness in the gut. If they are showing classic signs towards a specific autoimmune disease, I may refer them to a rheumatologist to try and get a panel. The majority of the time, they'll come to me with a specific diagnosis of saying, okay, I've seen a rheumatologist. They've given me these drugs, which are suppressing my immune system, and I feel okay on them, but I'm not sure whether that's going to help me long term. And that's when I sort of come in and talk about how can we actually resolve it from the root cause up. The key causes for autoimmunity that tend to come, especially because I live in Singapore, which is full of, the air is very moist. Top one is mold, and that was one of the key mediators for me. It could be like heavy metals, mercury amalgam fillings, eating lots of tuna sushi, and just not having very good detox pathways to allow it to remove. It could be, and this is the key for me, is that stress piece, which is where women are living in a sort of an upregulated state, in their sort of sympathetic dominant state. That's suppressing sort of good, thriving, cellular thriving. And that then is leading to more leakiness in the gut, because stress on its own can suppress good bacteria in the gut and mediate a more leaky gut. And so those are my top 3, really. Nutrient poor diet could also be part of it, because we live in a world where, processed food is the norm, and people aren't maybe eating enough protein or enough vegetables with phytonutrients and fiber. But that's sort of what, and the thing with any form of autoimmunity is you're not going to go, oh, well, I'm going to do this one thing and that will resolve it. You have to think about all the different mediators that exacerbate the issue.
Yeah, I completely agree because, again, in my personal situation, there are a number of contributing factors that are stress. I've been on antibiotics for years as a child because I was unwell, so that had contributed over a long sort of term period, I suppose, to destroying my gut barrier. And then I also had migraines and taking medication for that and anti-inflammatories and so on. And it was just this toxic cocktail that contributed to the absolute demise of my poor belly. And then the mercury toxicity as well that
Absolutely.
came out of nowhere. That was a random one, and I thought, "Where did that come from?" I don't eat a lot of seafood. I don't have, amalgam fillings at all. So that was an interesting one of trying to figure out where that came from. But I think it's so worth going down the path of trying to identify those root causes, to investigate, what is happening. Because what in in your view, what happens when this is left, unaddressed? What happens to the body?
So, as you've seen through my case, was that I had the celiac, then the psoriasis, I got allergies and asthma around that time as well. And then later on, I got the Hashimoto's diagnosis. Now, because my mum did a great job of removing the gluten, which is the key mediator of the autoimmunity for me when I was a baby. But what she didn't know at the time and what she didn't do was probably do like a process where she's going to heal the gut lining and stop having that ongoing attack on the lining. If you do not tackle and address and try and heal the leaky gut for your autoimmune diagnosis at the time, there's a chance your body may then start to move to another body part. Your immune system may start. So you get some people who pick up, say, 2 or 3 different types of autoimmune diseases because they're not addressing it at the time, it's a much harder process to deal with when you've got, say, Sjogren's plus MS plus Hashimoto's. So the key is trying to address that root cause early so that you can then also thrive. I mean, I thank God have now, because of working on the root cause approach, mine is totally reversed, and my Hashimoto's antibodies are all within reference range now, which is a relief. And I hope that I don't go back there. So that's the thing.
Do you think that there is some education required around autoimmune conditions? Because I do wonder whether some people think, "Okay, I've got an autoimmune condition and I'm stuck with that for life." And they're not aware that there are actually lifestyle changes that they can implement that can, reverse the symptoms and make a difference and actually make them non-symptomatic.
I think the hard part is the standard medical model does not support this, and rheumatologists aren't trained to try and work on lifestyle. I mean, the majority of the rheumatologists that are in Singapore um, will not agree with dietary changes, inflammation reduction through toxicity, healing guts. None of that is part of their language. So it's until we've managed to persuade the doctors, the rheumatologists who are experts in autoimmunity, then it's going to be a hard task. But I do find there's a couple of rheumatologists that work with my clients who see the change, and I've actually noticed a change in language with one of the rheumatologists. So now when somebody goes to her and they come to me, they've actually mentioned, "You could try changing your diet. You could try." The language is starting to happen, but until they get trained at medical school, that this is something that they could support somebody through, then it's gonna be quite a hard thing to tackle.
Yeah, and I think that's across the board. It's not just in Singapore, it's here in Australia as well. I've seen it definitely, being quite prevalent here where they just don't have that training, even in things like nutrition, and it becomes really frustrating, I think, to see that the medical fraternity aren't empowered to be able to help patients in this way. And the only way that you're going to get that level of support is to seek an alternative medical approach by seeking functional medical practitioner or a naturopath.
Yeah. And then that's looked on as a bit woo-woo, which actually, from me, I have a degree in chemistry and I have a very strong belief in the medical side of things. I absolutely 100% agree with it. And I work on looking at blood work and looking at puzzle piecing those symptoms. So it's not like I'm going go out and burn joss sticks and, dance in the moonlight. Not that there's anything wrong with that, actually. It can really calm the nervous system. But not the base of the treatment. The base of the treatment is finding what is causing it and addressing it by finding a not too stressful path for the person to make lifestyle changes. And I think that's the key is if they are empowered and excited by the fact that they're going to be helping their body, it doesn't feel like a really stressful process. It just feels like they're leaning into a little bit of curiosity around how is my body going to feel if I make these changes, and then slowly, layer by layer, peeling that onion and allowing for the body to start to thrive.
Definitely. You mentioned thyroids earlier and ranges, in terms of testing. Why do you think there are so many women that feel terrible despite being told that their thyroid labs are normal, in inverted commas? Happens a lot, right?
The range is too wide, I'm afraid. So you've got your TSH, which goes up to 4.5, but from a functional perspective, we don't really want to go over 2.5. Now, TSH being the pituitary gland sending a message to the thyroid to say we need more hormone. So the higher it goes, the more the thyroid is saying, or the more the brain is saying we need more hormone. So anything over 2.5, I would say you want to have a start to think. Now, that's also actually, you'll go to a doctor and they'll only do TSH, or they might do, there's two other markers, which is T4 and T3. T4 is the hormone that gets released from the thyroid, which is the gland in the base of the neck. That then needs to be converted to T3, which is the active hormone. So that's the hormone that gives you lots of energy. And if T4 is suppressed, say because of Hashimoto's, it might mean that there's less fuel to support T3 production. But there's also things like that limit between that conversion between T4 to T3 can be prevented, can be slowed down through, say, liver challenges, inflammation, stress. So when we look at the reference ranges, we want to go, okay, am I sitting for the T4 and the T3, am I sitting in the upper half of the reference range? Because if that's the case, then you should be okay. Now, there's also a caveat to that. Cortisol, which is your stress hormone that produced in the adrenals, which works very closely with the thyroid. If cortisol is rock bottom, cortisol actually is needed to help support that cellular movement of the hormone into the cells. So if you've got really low cortisol, having maybe gone through a period of long time stress, or it could even be like a physiological gut overgrowth where your body's just being very depleted, you're not going to be able to put the thyroid hormones into the cells. So it could be that your thyroid hormone isn't too bad, but if you're adrenally fatigued, if you're crashed out on that front, then that's going to exacerbate the thyroid hormone from getting into the cells.
So what do you think women misunderstand most about Hashimoto as being an immune issue rather than just a thyroid problem?
Yeah. So I think most women see the fact that they're taking something like T4 thyroxine, which is T4 thyroid support, and they see that is actually treating the Hashimoto's, which it's not. All it is doing is supporting your thyroid hormone, and it's only supporting the T4. So if you have a problem with converting your hormone from the T4 to the T3, or if you're chronically stressed and you're actually converting it into another hormone called reverse T3, which is basically can go high from stress. So if you're having problems there, then you're not addressing the actual root cause, which is the Hashimoto's, which is that autoimmunity. So the key thing I would suggest is, I'm not against taking thyroid hormone support. I think it's really valuable for people who are crashed out because we want to get their energy level up so they feel better again. But by taking the thyroid hormone, it's not addressing the autoimmunity, and that's a separate thing that you would need to work on in order to actually support the thyroid to come back to good health on its own.
Yeah. When we're looking at different autoimmune conditions, you've touched on stress somewhat today already, but I'd like to explore that a little bit more because I think it's so underestimated. And we were speaking offline earlier, and you were telling me about some additional training that you're doing because you're so passionate about nervous system regulation. So let's explore that a little bit more. Chronic stress, trauma, nervous system regulation. How important is that to trying to control any autoimmune flare ups if you do have an autoimmune condition?
Absolutely. For me, I think we live in a world which is much more the world is quite stressful. We've got a lot of things to juggle. A lot of us are working as well as rearing children, as well as having parents that are struggling. And, it's the world is all about looking after everyone else, and you come last. Now, for me, I'm a bit of a type A personality as well. So I like to get things done. And that's great. But even though I don't feel like I'm consciously stressed, tearing my hair out, that natural juggle on a day to day basis leads to a higher nervous system balance. So you're basically in a sympathetic dominant state, which is that fight or flight state, much more of the time than you should do. And actually, healing and thriving only happen when you're in a calm, rest and digest parasympathetic state. And so, from my own journey of healing, I did the gluten free because gluten can mediate leakiness in the gut. So, I did that, quite early on, especially, my history of celiac. I did looking into toxicity and working on mold mediation in my house and removing it from the body through taking binders. But the final piece of the puzzle is actually getting your nervous system to be calm. And that is actually really quite an easy thing to do, but it just takes a little bit of going against what your natural nature might be. And that's taking time out for yourself and doing things like breath work, meditation. Meditation's always been a challenge for me. So that's why I quite like things like somatic movement
Yeah.
and things like lymph flow and meridians and doing acupuncture and things like that. That's all going to support bringing you out of that sympathetic state into that calm, rest and digest state, which is the place where the body heals and thrives. And another factor is when you're in a stress response state, that can suppress the good bacteria in your gut and it can worsen leakiness in the gut. So that's a key thing that we want to uh, avoid because of the autoimmune link. So if we can calm down when we eat, especially actually just doing a few breaths before eating, because eating and digestion needs to have a calm parasympathetic state to produce the digestive secretions that will allow us to break down that food and allow that food to be utilized in the body from a nutrition standpoint. So I can get clients who are incredibly clean eaters who come to me who have got chronic bloating. And that's because they're eating in a sympathetic dominant state. They may be even eating lots and lots of fiber-filled foods, which are great for the gut. But if they're not digesting it, it's worsening the bloating. And so we need that calm rest and digest. It's called rest and digest state for
For a reason.
nothing. So
Yeah, and it's good that you've highlighted a few different modalities there in terms of trying to tackle that nervous system regulation because, like you, I similarly struggle with meditation, though it's a continual learning experience for me to try to master that, and that's an ongoing journey for me. But I think also even getting out in nature as well is a really great way to get some nervous system regulation. I live on acreage, and so prior to going in for dinner after I've finished here in the studio for the day, I like to go for a walk and go spend time with my horses, and I find that is
oh,
such a great way to really activate my parasympathetic nervous system. I do breath work while I'm walking around, put my feet on the grass. It's such a really lovely way to just get that nervous system settled and to really ground yourself and get some breath work done.
yeah, amazing. Yeah, and there's lots of things. Even looking at a nice panorama because basically when your ocular vision opens up, that brings in your parasympathetic state. There's something called the vagus nerve. That's another one that if you can learn different things like humming or singing or gargling, those can help with stimulating this vagus nerve that attaches the brain stem to your gut and your liver and your pancreas. And so that is that communication. When you open that up and you activate the vagus nerve, that which is humming. Whenever I get in the car, I will always do a little bit of breathing, and then I'll put some music on and I'll sing my heart out. That's great for the nervous.
Love it. I do that too, actually. I sing when I'm in the car as well. There's also some great technology out now that tackles the nervous system as well, and the vagus nerve in particular. There's one that I've been trialing, which is called the Pulsetto. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it specifically targets the vagus nerve system.
Okay. I think interestingly, I have been sent a few of these by clients, and they're quite expensive, aren't they? They're not, they're like $500 or something. And I was like, that's a lot of money to try something that I'm not sure, which actually you can do by doing a few strategies at home. So I think if you're a sort of person that will do things because you've got a new toy, and you can then feel how it feels to feel calm, then that might be a really good motivation. But also to not put people off who can't afford spending $500 to $1,000 on a toy, that they can do the humming. They can do something called Stanley Rosenberg technique that I like doing, where you put your hands behind your head and you look face forward, but you push your eyes to the right, really, really strongly to the right. And that ocular nerve is basically activating the vagus nerve. And what you'll find after even 30 seconds that you'll want to yawn, and that's that vagus nerve activating. And it's amazing.
I'll have to try that one. I haven't tried that one yet. Let's talk about strength training and how that can help support immune recovery without adding further inflammation or stress to the body, because it is a fine balance in trying to manage an autoimmune condition. And I personally believe strength training is very important for women, particularly in midlife. It is very important for longevity. What are your thoughts on how to manage that?
Oh, yes, I love it. I'm actually later on in life, age 45, probably younger than that actually, I trained to become a personal trainer. So I actually do boot camp sessions. Now, it's not that running around madly type boot camp sessions. It's actually working out in nature with dumbbells. And I think it's an incredibly powerful tool to help, not just with the vitality piece, not just with the fact that it supports your blood sugar balance, not that it just also helps with brain health, because it produces lots of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is helpful for brain health, but for the fact that it's going to help with our ability to support bone health later on in life, but also they actually associated strength of your quad muscles, your leg muscles, towards your better aging. So you've got strong quad muscles, you age better. So it's an absolutely really important tool to use. I think some women, as they get into midlife, they find the thought of introducing it quite overwhelming. And so I think that's why I love the boot camps that I run, because it can actually help people to start with a nice, fun community that nobody's an expert. Everybody's just doing it for a bit of fun and to get into that community. So that for me is it's a really important one of those factors in the sort of the supporting immune system balance is the strength training side of things, but not to do that intense, heavy cardio, which can be quite depleting on the adrenals. And we talked about adrenal fatigue earlier with, that link with how the thyroid hormone gets into the cell. If you're going to be doing running, that can actually deplete the adrenals. So we want to, step into a little bit of like cardio bursts and maybe a little bit of jumping to help with bone health, but not to do that excessive push. So your heart rate's up too much for too long.
Yeah. What are the biggest healthy habits that women with autoimmune issues are doing that might actually be making them worse?
Yeah, I think the key one for me is fasting,
Okay.
because it can cause a bit of a stress on the body.
Yeah.
just due to the fact that I'm not saying that you don't fast for the 12 to 14 hours overnight. That's not really a fast. That's just a standard, dinner at 6, 7 o'clock through to breakfast at 7, 8 o'clock. It's those long fasts through to lunchtime after having done a heavy workout. The body goes into a stress response state because actually our cortisol is the thing that raises our blood sugar. And if we don't have some form of sort of a protein filled breakfast or some, even it doesn't have to be like a heavy, full meal, even just a sort of, I say, a smoothie with some protein powder in and some veggies and some berries, that can help with supporting that, calming the nervous system, sending the message to the body it's safe. And I learned by the hard way, which I was doing too much exercise and fasting all morning. And that really did affect my adrenals and my thyroid health. It suppressed my thyroid.
It did.
So that's the key.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I was pushing myself too hard in my workouts. I was doing fasting as well, intermittent fasting, and I had some tests done and my inflammation markers were through the roof. And I'm like, what do you mean? What's going on there? That's crazy. That shouldn't be the case. And then I realized it was because I was pushing my body too hard and that I wasn't nourishing my body at the right time and the right way.
Yeah. I think it gets a little bit addictive to do it because it feels great. You come back from that nice long run and you get that euphoric high. But once I actually got told by my doctor to stop running. She literally told me that. She told me I had to get rid of my cats, which I was allergic to, and to stop running. I slowly geared that down, and thank God I did. It really made a difference.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the gut immune connection in autoimmune disease and why that's so critical. We've touched on it somewhat today, but I'd really like to highlight the importance of this because I believe that a lot of chronic conditions start in the gut, and that if we don't get on top of gut health, that can be so detrimental to our overall health in the long run. Your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's several areas that we would sort of want to think about when it comes to gut health. Is we want to have, good microbial diversity that are supportive because the microbes in our gut will provide the nutrients. We can't make vitamin K. We can't eat it well enough in our food without the right bacteria to support that, and that supports bone health. Um, I think the difficulty we have is the balance when it comes to supporting that gut improvement, and it's a fine line you need to work down. You can't go from having chronic bloating through to eating loads of fibrous vegetables and expect that to be an easy path. And I think that's where people can sometimes struggle. And the key really for me is let's get the digestion right. So calming the nervous system, getting the digestion right, that can help with supporting the movement of the food that's been digested through the digestive tract, and so that it's in the right place. I think people quite well known issue is something called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and this is quite well known. I had that. A lot of my clients come to me with either a diagnosis of SIBO or very strong signs, because I don't know whether in Australia do they do the breath test for SIBO at all?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So something like SIBO, you can't just add lots of fiber. In fact, you're told to go on a FODMAP diet, a low FODMAP diet. Now, FODMAPs are basically the fructooglio. They're the foods that. Yeah, it's I can't. Yeah, I always just say SIBO and FODMAP. So
Yeah.
So what we need to do is come off the high fiber diet to support that reduction in fermentation in the gut. But when we do that, we can't do it long term. We've got to make sure that we then start to refeed the gut. So it's going through that process. So there's the autoimmune protocol diet, which I'm not sure. Did you ever try that?
Well, I did for a period of time, but I had to go through a similar process to what you're explaining at the moment now, where because I had leaky gut twice, really, because the first time round I didn't heal the gut lining, exactly as you highlighted earlier, because I wasn't advised to do so, right? And so it came back, and then I had to go back again to a different naturopath to get some additional support. And they were like, okay, not only are you doing this elimination diet, you've also got to cut out the fructose and so on, but then we also need to give you some other supplements to help heal the gut lining, and do
Yeah.
that. So there was this sort of elimination diet that I had to go through, really cutting back on anything that was high in fructose, cutting out gluten, cutting out anything
Yeah.
that's white, dairy, anything that's inflammatory.
Dairy,
Yeah,
soy.
that's it.
Yeah.
All those. Then making sure that then I healed the gut lining before I then started to reintroduce um, any of the fiber and fruit and so on. So I found also that obviously alcohol as well is a big one when it comes to leaky gut, right? Because it causes so much inflammation. And so I was essentially on a 6-month detox, doing this very, very clean diet. I often said that it was a breatharian for a while there because it was so limiting in terms of what I could and couldn't eat. But I had to do it because it's the only way that I could heal my gut.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it takes quite a lot of determination, and that, I think, is where a lot of people find that they can't get to the other side.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain degree is to see that when you're trying to heal a leaky gut, you're making a lifestyle choice when you
Mhm.
do it rather than, and I'm not saying you do long term, I mean, for me, I don't eat gluten because I've had the celiac diagnosis and I know that it's not going to help with my gut lining. But, it's making sure that you go follow through with that process and you um, try and lean into it as a sort of not to not like as if you're depriving yourself too much. That it's more of you're empowering yourself to feed, healthy food. So yeah, the gut lining piece, the treading carefully on not cutting out the FODMAPs forever, which I get clients who've been on low FODMAP diet for like a year, and it's like that's also going to have an effect on the gut.
Yeah.
Um, and having faith in the process that it does work. It's just a question of of really focusing. The alcohol piece, I stopped drinking alcohol about 7.5 years ago
Mm.
now, and it's the best thing I ever did, really, because I just don't have to worry about it, and that's my choice. I love doing it now, but alcohol, yeah, it's going to exacerbate that leakiness in its own right, and it's going to affect the gut bacteria, and it's a toxin. It's going to take over all your detox pathways every time you drink. So that's also a really important one. Um, and if you can't stop, then to try and just water it down as much as possible and have it sort of just for special occasions. I think that can be a really great mindset shift because it's about mindset.
It is, and that behavioral change component as well, which I'm really passionate about. I mean, we've got alcohol-free wine now as well. There are other beverage options out there that you can swap swap them out for, and it's a great way to kinda trick the brain into thinking, "Oh, I'm having, an alcoholic beverage, and I'm socializing," and it is very well, particularly here in Australia, I don't know what it's like in Singapore, but it's a time to go have a drink with a mate, like, I think it's a little difficult for people sometimes just because of culture, but in that swap and you don't feel like I even have a non-alcoholic cocktail. There's some great ones now that people can purchase and still feel like that they're
Yeah.
socializing and having that important connection with their friends without actually drinking something that's going to further exacerbate the gut inflammation and contribute to leaky gut. And for me, I hardly ever drink alcohol, and it's been a slow process of elimination. I reintroduced it after I healed my gut, but then I find, and I think it depends where you drink alcohol. I find here in Australia, I can't drink alcohol hardly ever. I think there's a lot of preservatives and so on in our wines here that aren't great. But if I'm in Europe, if I'm in France or in Italy, then I don't find the alcohol there impacts me as much. Having said that, I had tried to have a glass of wine with on Easter Sunday here with family and friends on the farm here, and I think I took one sip and my body was like, "Nope, I don't want any of this. Stop drinking immediately." And I didn't drink the rest of it. And I'm okay with that. I'm truly okay with not drinking alcohol. And I think even more so for women in midlife, we have a much lower tolerance,
Yes.
particularly once we hit perimenopause,
Totally.
menopause. Are you finding that?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, for me, I gave up a long time ago, but the histamines in wine can be not great for the body, and estrogen, when that gets a little bit all over the place, that can really exacerbate the histamine intolerance. I love kombucha. That's
Oh,
my favorite go-to drink, actually. And we brew it at home. So we've got,
okay.
10 liters of kombucha jar, and we brew that on a every 10 days. And it's pretty amazing spot. I have it with a bit of fizzy water, and that's my, Friday, Saturday evening. And I think, especially when it comes to alcohol, the longer you're not drinking it, the more your friends get used to it. And as long as everyone else who wants to drink is able to drink, then I think it's absolutely fine. And it's letting go. For me, it was letting go of the people pleasing aspect of saying that you're drinking to join them in, because as long as they're drinking, they're fine.
Yeah, absolutely agree. We've touched on a little bit about some of those midlife changes that women go through, perimenopause and menopause. How often do you see autoimmune symptoms being mistaken for perimenopause or hormonal imbalance?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's quite huge that that women. I think, interestingly, it becomes more prevalent as you go through perimenopause, because actually, when you or nearing the end of perimenopause, because estrogen, when that drops, that's actually quite a good anti-inflammatory, and so it's sort of quite supportive of the body, and so it can sometimes be a situation where the autoimmunity is hidden by the fact that they're having cycles and the estrogen is nice and strong. And that's why actually you get quite a few women in midlife having issues with suddenly finding out, oh my gosh, I've got Hashimoto's. I run a group program here, and I tend to find, when I have about 10 women starting every 3 months, and when they come to me, none of them have got the diagnoses, but they're just not feeling great. And they go off and get some blood work. And normally 2 to 3 in each group gets a Hashimoto's diagnosis. And it doesn't mean that it's a strong, hundreds or thousands. I have had clients who've got, 4,000 as their Hashimoto's autoimmune antibody, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But it's normally like 30 or 40, and actually, with those, if they make some really cool strategic lifestyle changes, it can go very quickly. It's not, it's that temporary leakiness, that temporary inflammatory reaction, which we can rebalance by just supporting the lifestyle side of things.
Yeah, definitely. What have you learned about the relationship between maternal stress load, caring for neurodivergent children, and autoimmune resilience? Because we often talk on this
Yeah.
podcast about women who are going through perimenopause and menopause, but there are women who are younger as well that have autoimmune conditions and have a lot on their plate as well. So I'd like to touch on that.
Yeah, well, from my own personal story, my son, when he was 6 years old, this was, around the time I got the diagnosis for Hashimoto's, he was unable to thrive in school. We ended up having to take him out of school. We did this, and that was actually the reason why I found functional medicine, was because through him, I saw that he had this bloated belly, behavioral issues, diagnosed with dyslexia, dyscalculia, and autism at the age of 7. We were like, "Oh my gosh, this is not great. What can we do about it?"
Mm.
And for me, I hadn't, me was the least healthy person you'd ever meet. And I was suddenly being thrust into this world of, oh my God, we've got to try and support him, because I really don't want this to be the future for him. So we went through a whole sort of GI map gut healing journey with him. And he's now actually 18, and he's not autistic or dyscalculic. He's getting top marks in all his exams. He's, literally just won an award for the top student in his whole year group. Um, he's now, I mean, it makes me so proud. Now, that process, when he was 6, I would say, was part of the trigger for my autoimmunity. So it's, supporting kids through neurodivergent challenges is incredibly stressful, but there is a lot you can do about it. And I think that, for me, has really inspired me to really stick with that functional medicine and training, and start supporting mums and women with autoimmune diseases as well.
Mm. I agree. I think that there are so many women out there that experience and go through similar experience what you went through. And I know that when my eldest son was younger, he had some learning difficulties, and it probably was back then when I started to look at how food is impacting the body and what can we do to change things up so that It supported him in terms of his ability to learn things at school and focus better for sure. What are the early red flags that should prompt women to investigate autoimmune issues before it progresses?
Okay. I think the classic signs of sort of immune imbalance would be lots of allergies, actually, starting to suddenly become sensitive to loads of different foods and bloating the whole time. That's a key red flag. Now, it's not just about the gut. If you're constantly getting flares of eczema on your skin, that could be part of it. Yeah. Um, and then, of course, it's the energy piece, as in it's that being wide awake in the middle of the night, but crashing in the afternoon. Different autoimmune diseases have different, manifestations. So, a classic thing is, say when you've got very dry mouth and dry skin and dry eyes, could that be Sjogren's? For Hashimoto's, it's an interesting one. A lot of the time it's about sort of aching joints and muscles. I know when I go through a period of stress, and like we moved last year and we had lots of moldy stuff that I'd moved from one house and not really done much with, and I could feel the new mold exposure happening, and my body then, and I was stressed because that's when you get that sort of achy joints and muscles and you start to feel that. So I would watch out for the classic allergy signs, but also watch out for that sort of the aching joints and muscles out of nowhere. You've not done a workout yet, you're feeling achy joints and muscles. But some people, it could be headaches, others it could be asthma even. So it's weird because it manifests in something that might not be anything to do with that autoimmunity. It's just showing that leakiness in the gut is causing that activated immune system, like nasal congestion, that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we are so by individual. I often say that on this podcast, everybody presents differently and reacts differently. So it's important for them to be listening to their bodies and looking out for those signs and then doing some digging and testing to see what could be causing that and try to identify the root cause and get on top of it before it gets to a point where it really impacts your health and your life so that you don't end up in bed with the severe crippling migraines like I did. Yeah.
I know, I know. I think also if you are aware that things like mercury amalgam fillings, mold toxicity, and knowing that the key mediators also help you to go, okay, well, I have been living in mold, for however long. Maybe it's something to do with mold, or I have got mercury amalgam fillings. Don't go out rushing to get them removed, but just be aware that that could be a mediator.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover off on autoimmune conditions, before we wrap up for today, Jo? Anything that you feel we haven't covered yet that we should cover?
I think you've been very thorough. I think it's amazing that you're spreading the word about this because I think it's something that we're becoming more and more aware of. And to go out and get tested if you feel not right, really advocate for yourself and go to your doctor and say, "Look, I do feel not great. Can you just try and rule this out for me?" And it could be just looking at a hematology panel. So in a blood work panel, there's something called the differential. And you can see that, and I'm sure ChatGPT can help you with that, but the differential should have a specific ratio of the number of neutrophils, lymphocytes. You could even see, is there some sort of food sensitivity or autoimmunity in that differential as that first pass of like, is something skewing? Don't be scared that you have to go in for that whole autoimmune antibody test to get that first sort of understanding of what's happening with your immune system. An easy way to understand whether the immune system is slightly skewed is to get a hematology panel, a complete blood chemistry, which tells us what your hemoglobin is doing, but it also tells us what your immune system is doing there's something called a differential, and that gives us your lymphocytes, neutrophils, monocytes, eosinophils, basophils. And those basically should be skewed in a specific way to be supportive of a normal immune system. So you could have a look at that. And that's, I mean, ideally you would come to me or come to a naturopath and be able to speak to somebody to really delve into the root cause and to really look for what may be happening in the body. But as a first pass, if you really aren't feeling great, advocate for yourself, get to see a doctor, do some basic blood work just to see what's going on. And that might give you a first pass. And be aware of the fact that a lot of doctors, that they're more trained in sort of acute diagnosis rather than that, the autoimmune chronic illness side of things. So if they're not aware, they might not be exceptionally open to be doing much root cause digging, but they can run that top level blood work, which you can then share with a practitioner for them to help just delve a little bit deeper into what's going on. And I work with clients all over the world. Yesterday, I was talking to somebody in America in the morning and somebody in India in the afternoon. And so it's you don't have to be in Australia to be doing it.
Yeah, awesome. And we will make sure that we pop the links into your website so that people can connect with you if they wanted to make an appointment with you to get some testing done or have a chat with you. So, look, Jo, thank you so much for doing a deep dive into autoimmune conditions today, in particular Hashimoto's. I think that's going to be of great value to our listeners, and look forward to chatting with you again soon. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you. That's great. I've really enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap for today's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. And if you'd like to learn more about biohacking, go ahead and sign up on my website at www.biohack-her.com to get a free copy of my 5 top biohacks to get you kick-started. While you're there, you can also check out my blog page for more tips on biohacking. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on Apple, Spotify, and Google Play. Let us know if there's anyone you'd like us to talk to in particular, and we'll endeavour to get them on the podcast. Until next time, remember to live well longer.